Dear listener, some names in the Qur'an are surrounded by long stories, detailed struggles, and powerful confrontations. Others appear briefly, almost quietly, yet carry an aura of immense significance. Among those names is Idris alayhi salam, mentioned only a few times, described in just a handful of verses, yet honored with words that echo with mystery. Indeed, he was truthful and a prophet, and we raised him to a high station. That is all. No long narrative, no detailed confrontation with his people, no extended dialogue recorded, just a description. Truthful, a prophet, raised to a high station. The scarcity of detail is not an absence of importance. It is an invitation. Who was this man whose life occupies so few lines in Revelation, yet whose rank is described as elevated? Why does the Qur'an preserve his name with such precision while leaving the rest veiled? Why was he raised? Contrast this with human fascination. We are drawn to stories with elaborate drama. We expect length to equal significance. But Allah chooses differently. Sometimes the most powerful lives are summarized in the fewest words. Idris alayhi salam stands between giants of history. After Adam alayhi salam, humanity was still young. Before Nuh alayhi salam, corruption had not yet reached its peak. Idris lived in an era that most people rarely consider, a generation between origin and flood, between innocence and widespread rebellion. He was not surrounded by established civilizations like later prophets. He was not confronting empires like Musa alayhi salam. He was not delivering scripture like the final messenger, yet Allah describes him with two attributes that define spiritual greatness: absolute truthfulness and prophethood. Truthfulness is not a small characteristic. In Islam, Siddiq is a rank just beneath prophethood. It reflects integrity so complete that speech and action align perfectly with divine command. To be described as truthful by Allah Himself is not praise of personality. It is confirmation of inner purity. And then comes the phrase that captures the imagination. We raised him to a high station. The wording is deliberate. Raised, not honored only, not remembered only, raised. Does this mean spiritual elevation? Does this mean physical ascension? The verse does not explain. It leaves space that invites reflection, scholarship, and reverence. This is the nature of Idris alayhi salam's story. It exists in glimpses, hints, fragments preserved through the Qur'an and narration. Yet those fragments are enough to suggest a life of extraordinary devotion. Sometimes silence around a story increases its weight. When details are few, attention sharpens. Every word matters more. Idris is not forgotten. He is preserved intentionally, mentioned among prophets, elevated among servants. And perhaps that is the first lesson of his story. True elevation does not require long biographies. It requires sincerity known to Allah. His name may not dominate pages, but his rank dominates hearts that understand what it means to be raised by the Lord of the heavens. And to understand that elevation, we must return to the world in which he lived, a world still young, yet already changing. To understand the mission of Idris alayhi salam, we must step back into a time when humanity was still young. Generations had passed since Adam alayhi salam walked the earth, but civilization as we know it had not yet formed. There were no sprawling cities, no empires, no complex governments. Life was simpler, yet simplicity does not guarantee purity. The early descendants of Adam lived closer to their origin. They remembered the story of creation. They knew of Iblis and his refusal. They inherited awareness of accountability. But as generations multiplied, distance from direct revelation grew. Memory softened, warnings felt less immediate. And with distance came subtle shifts. Corruption does not explode overnight. It begins quietly. People become comfortable. Traditions form. Practices are inherited without examination. Gradually, obedience turns into routine rather than conviction. Gratitude becomes assumed rather than expressed. The human heart, left unchecked, drifts. Contrast the earliest generation, who witness divine signs directly with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The first carried awe fresh in their memory. Later generations carried stories, and stories can lose urgency when they are no longer personal. It was in this environment that Idris alayhi salam emerged. The world was not yet drowning in open rebellion like in the time of Nuh alayhi salam, but cracks were forming. Discipline was weakening. Desire was gaining strength. Small acts of disobedience began to normalize, and normalization is dangerous. When wrongdoing becomes familiar, it no longer shocks the conscience. It blends into daily life. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. The forbidden becomes tolerated. Human society at that stage was still developing basic structures: agriculture, craftsmanship, trade. With development came competition. With competition came envy. With envy came injustice. The same pattern that would repeat across centuries began to show itself in early form. This is the environment that required a prophet. Idris was not sent into total chaos. He was sent into early deviation. His mission was preventive as much as corrective. Before corruption became irreversible, before arrogance solidified into defiance, he called his people back. Contrast this with later prophetic missions. Nuh alayhi salam would preach for centuries to a people drowning in idolatry. Ibrahim alayhi salam would confront an entire society built upon carved gods. Musa alayhi salam would challenge a tyrant claiming divinity, but Idris lived in the in-between when humanity was still forming its direction. That stage is critical. When society is young, guidance shapes trajectory. When corruption is early, correction can still redirect course. His role was to anchor knowledge and discipline before chaos overtook generations. And perhaps this is why his story is brief in revelation. His era was not defined by dramatic confrontation, but by foundational teaching. His influence may not have been loud, but it was essential. Humanity was learning how to live, and Idris alayhi salam was teaching them how to live correctly. Among the reports transmitted about Idris alayhi salam is a remarkable distinction. He was the first to write with the pen. While the Qur'an does not detail this explicitly, classical scholars mention narrations that attribute to him the beginning of structured writing, measurement, and organized knowledge. Whether every detail is confirmed or not, the consistent portrayal is clear. Idris was a prophet deeply connected to knowledge and discipline. Imagine humanity at that stage. Oral communication dominated. Memory carried stories. Skills were passed through demonstration and repetition. Writing was not yet a widespread tool. In such an environment, introducing the pen was not a small advancement. It was a transformation. The pen preserves what memory can lose. Contrast a world where knowledge fades with generations to a world where it can be recorded, reviewed, and transmitted accurately. Writing creates continuity. It anchors truth against distortion. It allows guidance to outlive its speaker. If Idris alayhi salam indeed initiated structured writing, this aligns beautifully with his description as truthful. A truthful prophet concerned with preserving guidance would value clarity and record. Knowledge becomes a shield, not ornament. But writing alone does not elevate a society. Intention determines its use. A pen can record truth or falsehood. It can spread guidance or confusion. What made Idris unique was not merely skill, but purpose. Reports also describe him as someone who taught people to measure garments, to sew, to calculate, to organize their affairs with precision. These details reflect discipline, order, structure. Contrast this with moral chaos. When a community lacks structure, injustice spreads easily. Boundaries blur. Responsibilities become vague. Knowledge applied correctly builds fairness and accountability. The image that emerges is not of a prophet shouting warnings alone, but of a teacher shaping habits, teaching practical skills alongside spiritual guidance, elevating society through both moral clarity and intellectual refinement. This combination is powerful. Faith without discipline can become emotion. Discipline without faith can become arrogance. Idris embodied both, a prophet of truth and structure. The Qur'an later emphasizes the importance of the pen in Surah Al-Alaq and Surah Al-Qalam. Knowledge recorded becomes part of divine appreciation. It is as though the legacy of early prophets like Idris laid groundwork for the final revelation that would place learning at its center. Contrast fleeting speech with written guidance. One fades in the air, the other anchors across centuries. In a world still young, Idris introduced elevation through learning. He did not simply warn of sin, he cultivated understanding. He did not only preach, he educated. And education is quiet revolution. His people may not have faced immediate catastrophe, but their direction mattered. Knowledge grounded in obedience creates stability. Ignorance combined with desire creates decay. Idris alayhi salam stands as an early symbol of intellectual responsibility in prophetic history, a reminder that closeness to Allah is not detached from learning, precision, and effort. And perhaps that connection between knowledge and righteousness is part of what prepared him for the elevation described later. For those who honor knowledge sincerely are often raised in rank beyond what the world can see. As generations passed and human life became more structured, something else began to grow quietly: resistance to guidance. Idris alayhi salam was not sent into a world of perfect obedience. He was sent into a society where deviation was beginning to take shape, where comfort was softening conviction, and where discipline was starting to weaken. Corruption does not always announce itself loudly. It begins with small compromises. A boundary is crossed once, then again. A habit forms. What once felt wrong begins to feel normal. And when enough people participate, sin loses its shock. Idris stood before such a people. He called them back before their decline became irreversible. He reminded them of their origin, that they were created, sustained, and accountable. He warned them that arrogance, envy, and injustice would only deepen if left unchecked. His message was not only about worship, it was about alignment, aligning life with truth before it drifted too far. Contrast this with the later era of Nuh alayhi salam. By the time Nuh was sent, idolatry had spread widely, and stubborn rejection had hardened into defiance. But in Idris's time, corruption was still in its early stages. The call was preventative. The warning was timely. Yet even early warnings meet resistance. Human nature resists correction, especially when comfort is involved. Some likely dismissed him quietly. Others may have questioned why change was necessary. When life appears stable, urgency feels exaggerated. People prefer familiarity over reform. But prophets do not measure truth by popularity. Idris alayhi salam carried his mission with patience. His role was to anchor righteousness before society collapsed under its own negligence. He taught discipline not only as skill, but as spiritual shield. He reinforced obedience not merely as ritual, but as protection. Contrast obedience with complacency. Obedience requires effort, consistent prayer, conscious morality, intentional restraint. Complacency requires nothing, it drifts, and drifting over time leads far from shore. The warnings Idris delivered may not have sparked dramatic confrontation, but they planted seeds. Seeds that would influence those who listened. Seeds that would preserve guidance among pockets of sincerity. Not every prophet faces immediate mass rebellion. Some lay foundations, some slow decay. Some prevent collapse for a generation. The absence of dramatic opposition does not lessen their struggle. It simply changes its nature. The era of Idris was transitional. Humanity stood at a crossroads between maintaining early purity and sliding toward widespread corruption. His voice was a call to stability, and while not all responded, the presence of a prophet in that era was mercy, a reminder that Allah does not abandon humanity to drift without guidance. The flood of news time would come later, but before storms arrive, warnings are sent. Idris was one of those warnings, a steady voice before chaos, a light before darkness deepened. And perhaps his steadfastness in such a subtle yet crucial era is part of what earned him the elevation that followed. Among the brief yet powerful mentions of Idris alayhi salam in the Qur'an, one verse stands above the rest in mystery. And we raised him to a high station. The wording is simple, yet its implications are profound. Allah does not describe the manner of this elevation, nor does he detail its timing. The statement is left concise, deliberate, measured, weighty, raised. The Arabic word carries depth. It implies lifting, elevation, honor, distinction. But was this elevation spiritual alone? Was it rank and status in the sight of Allah? Or was it physical ascension beyond the earth? Scholars throughout Islamic history reflected carefully on this phrase. Some held that the meaning referred to spiritual rank, that Idris was elevated in status among prophets, honored for his truthfulness and devotion. This interpretation emphasizes moral and spiritual greatness rather than physical movement. Others cited narrations suggesting that Idris was taken up alive to the heavens. They connected this understanding to reports describing his encounter with the angel of death and his presence in the fourth heaven. These reports, though not equal in strength to Quranic text, have been discussed by classical scholars with reverence and caution. Contrast the two views. One focuses on internal elevation, a rank invisible yet immense. The other points to external elevation, a literal raising beyond earthly limits. Both interpretations share a common core. Allah honored Idris in a way distinct from ordinary human experience, and that is the heart of the matter. Whether the raising was physical, spiritual, or both, the verse establishes something undeniable. Idris did not live and die as an unnoticed servant. His truthfulness and prophethood were acknowledged by divine action. The Qur'an rarely elaborates unnecessarily. When it chooses brevity, it invites contemplation. The mystery surrounding Idris's elevation increases its impact. It prevents over-familiarity. It keeps the event sacred rather than casual. Contrast this with human desire for detail. We often seek exact timelines, vivid descriptions, step-by-step narratives. But divine wisdom sometimes withholds detail to preserve awe. Not every sacred moment is meant to be dissected completely. The phrase, "a high station," also carries symbolic weight. Elevation in Islam is never random. Allah raises whom He wills, based on sincerity, patience, and devotion. The Qur'an repeatedly links elevation with righteousness. To be raised is to be honored, not for lineage, not for wealth, but for truth. And truth defined Idris. He was described first as Siddiq, truthful, before mention of elevation. The sequence matters. Character precedes honor, integrity precedes distinction. Elevation is not granted arbitrarily, it follows steadfastness. This verse also plants a seed of anticipation. If Idris was raised, where? If he was elevated, how? If he was honored, in what manner? These questions linger, leading naturally into the narrations that speak of ascent. The mystery is not meant to confuse, it is meant to magnify. Idris alayhi salam was not simply remembered, he was lifted. And that lifting would later be witnessed again, not in his own era, but in the miraculous journey of the final prophet. Among the narrations discussed by early scholars is a striking account of Idris alayhi salam's elevation. It is reported that he developed a close relationship with one of the angels. Through consistent worship and devotion, his deeds were carried upward daily. When the angel of death was commanded to take his soul, it is said that Idris requested to witness how souls are taken. The angel of death, surprised by this request, responded that such knowledge belonged to divine decree. According to the report, Idris was then raised through the heavens. Layer after layer of the unseen realm opened before him, realms no human eye had seen before. The earth beneath him grew distant. The sky that once seemed vast became a passageway. Creation unfolded in dimensions beyond imagination. Contrast earthly limitation with celestial expansion. On earth, humanity walks beneath the sky, unaware of its layers. In this narration, Idris moves upward through them, carried by divine permission. Each ascent symbolizes separation from worldly attachment and closeness to the unseen reality that surrounds existence. When he reached the fourth heaven, the angel of death encountered him there. It is said that the angel expressed astonishment, explaining that he had been commanded to take Idris' soul in the fourth heaven, yet Idris had originally been on earth. The meeting itself fulfilled the decree. In that moment, Idris' soul was taken in the heavens rather than on earth. Whether every detail of this narration holds equal strength among scholars, the consistent theme remains. His elevation was not ordinary. His life concluded not in anonymity, but in ascent. The story carries profound symbolism. A man known for truthfulness and knowledge is raised beyond the limits of the earth. A prophet who disciplined his people in structure and worship is honored with proximity to the heavens. The physical journey mirrors spiritual reality. Elevation earned through devotion. Contrast this with human obsession with worldly heights. People strive to rise in status, influence, and visibility, yet true elevation is not measured by applause. It is measured by closeness to Allah. Idris did not seek fame, he sought obedience, and obedience raised him higher than ambition ever could. The ascent also foreshadows a later, greater journey, the Isra and Mi'raj of Prophet Muhammad. In that miraculous night, the final messenger would travel through the heavens and meet prophets along the way. Among them was Idris in the fourth heaven. This connection is powerful. It bridges eras, separated by thousands of years. It confirms that Idris's elevation was not metaphor alone. He was present in a heavenly realm encountered during Mi'raj. The journey beyond earth, whether understood literally or spiritually, communicates a clear truth. Allah honors his righteous servants in ways that transcend human understanding. Some are raised in rank, some are raised in memory, some are raised in both. Idris alayhi salam's story is not about spectacle, it is about reward. A life of truth culminated in elevation. A prophet who anchored knowledge among early humanity was himself anchored in the heavens, and his presence there would later greet the final messenger, affirming that righteousness leaves traces that endure beyond time. Centuries passed between the time of Idris alayhi salam and the final messenger. Civilizations rose and fell, floods reshaped the earth, prophets came and delivered their messages. Yet the story of Idris did not end with his elevation. It resurfaced on one of the most extraordinary nights in human history, the night of Isra and Mi'raj. When the Prophet Muhammad was taken from Makkah to Jerusalem and then ascended through the heavens, he did not travel alone through empty space. In each heaven, he encountered prophets who had preceded him, Adam alayhi salam in the first, Isa and Yahya alayhim salam in the second, Yusuf alayhi salam in the third, and in the fourth heaven, Idris alayhi salam. The meeting is brief in narration, yet powerful in implication. The prophet described him as welcoming and praying for him. This encounter confirms that Idris's elevation was not symbolic alone. He was present in a heavenly realm, distinct and recognized. Contrast the two journeys. Idris was raised upward by divine decree. Muhammad was invited upward in a miraculous night journey. One ascended as completion of life, the other ascended as affirmation of mission. The fourth heaven becomes a point of connection across time. A prophet from the earliest generations stands there, greeting the final messenger of the last generation. The gap of centuries collapses. History folds inward. Prophethood is shown as a single chain, not scattered stories. This meeting reveals continuity. The mission of truth did not begin in Makkah with Muhammad, nor did it begin in the time of Nuh or Ibrahim. It began with the earliest prophets, including Idris. Each carried light in their era. Each upheld Tawheed. Each stood firm against deviation. Idris's presence in the fourth heaven is a quiet affirmation of his rank. He is not lost in history. He is not forgotten in obscurity. He stands among prophets, honored beyond the limits of earth. Contrast human measures of remembrance with divine preservation. Some names dominate history books but vanish in the hereafter. Others receive few earthly details, yet hold immense rank in divine sight. Idris's story, brief on earth, continues in the heavens. The meeting also carries a subtle lesson about elevation. The prophet, despite being the greatest of all prophets, greeted his predecessors with humility and respect. There was no competition, no rivalry, only brotherhood in faith. In a world where status often breeds comparison, the heavens display unity. The Isra and Miraj was filled with signs of paradise, of hell, of divine power. Yet among its quiet signs was the reminder that those who dedicate their lives to truth are never lost. They are preserved, elevated, and remembered in realms beyond human sight. Idris alayhi salam may not have left behind long recorded sermons. He may not have faced dramatic public confrontation, but he was raised. And centuries later, he stood in the fourth heaven as witness to the final messenger's ascent. That image alone reshapes how we measure greatness. True honor is not loud, it is lasting, and elevation in the sight of Allah echoes far beyond the earth where it began. The story of Idris alayhi salam does not end with his ascent. It leaves behind a question that reaches every generation. Why does Allah raise some servants above others? What distinguished Idris to the point that he was described as truthful, chosen as a prophet, and elevated to a high station? The Qur'an gives us clues in its simplicity. It does not detail his wealth. It does not mention his tribe or lineage. It does not highlight worldly influence. It emphasizes two qualities: truthfulness and prophethood. Character before elevation, integrity before distinction. Truthfulness is more than avoiding lies. It is alignment between belief, speech, and action. A truthful servant does not shift with convenience. He does not compromise when pressure rises. His inner state reflects his outward claim. Idris was not elevated for momentary acts. He was elevated for consistency. Contrast this with how humans often measure greatness. Society celebrates visibility, numbers, and applause. Elevation, in worldly terms, usually depends on recognition. But divine elevation operates differently. It may remain hidden from history books, yet be monumental in the unseen. Idris lived in an era without large empires or global recognition. His audience was small compared to later prophets, yet Allah raised him. This reveals a profound principle. Elevation is not tied to audience size. It is tied to sincerity. Another distinguishing quality attributed to Idris in classical reports is his dedication to worship. It is said that he devoted himself intensely to remembrance and obedience. Whether every narration about his worship is equally strong, the pattern of his life suggests devotion was central. Devotion lifts the soul before it lifts the body. Contrast the one who seeks to rise through ambition with the one who rises through submission. The ambitious strive to climb over others. The devoted strive to kneel before Allah. The first may gain temporary status, the second gains lasting rank. The phrase, "we raised him," carries divine initiative. Elevation was not self-earned in isolation. It was granted. This reminds us that no matter how sincere a servant becomes, elevation remains a gift. Effort prepares the heart, but Allah determines the height. The lesson extends beyond Idris. Not all believers will be raised physically. Not all will experience miraculous ascents. But every believer has the opportunity to be raised in rank. Through knowledge pursued sincerely, through truth upheld consistently, through worship performed quietly. Elevation in Islam is not escape from responsibility. It is a reward for fulfilling it. The life of Idris teaches that foundational work matters. Teaching early generations, preserving knowledge, calling people back gently before corruption spreads. These acts may seem small in the moment, but they shape futures. Allah sees what history may overlook. In a world obsessed with visibility, Idris stands as early symbol of intellectual responsibility in prophetic history. A reminder that the highest ranks may belong to those whose stories are brief but whose sincerity is deep. He was truthful, he was a prophet, he was raised, and in those three descriptions lies a blueprint, not for fame, but for closeness. True honor is not loud, it is lasting, and elevation in the sight of Allah echoes far beyond the earth where it began. The story of Idris alayhi salam is not long in the Qur'an, yet its impact is immense. A man described as truthful, a prophet entrusted with guidance, a servant raised to a high station. Few details, yet powerful meaning. Not everyone will ascend through the heavens. Not everyone will be mentioned across generations. But every believer is given the opportunity to be raised in rank before Allah. Elevation begins quietly. It begins with truthfulness, when lying would be easier, with discipline when comfort invites laziness, with knowledge sought sincerely, not for pride, but for purpose. Idris was not raised for spectacle. He was raised for sincerity. In a world chasing visibility, his story reminds us that the highest honor may remain unseen by people, but never unseen by Allah. The heavens welcomed him because the earth witnessed his devotion. And perhaps the real lesson is this: we may never leave this world the way Idris did, but if we live with integrity, patience, and obedience, we too can be raised, not in height, but in worth. True elevation is not about reaching the sky. It is about rising in the sight of the one who created it.